Yep. Hi, everybody. How's it going? Yep. Feeling good? Cool. Awesome. I'm feeling pretty good, too. My name's Perry. I'm really excited to be here. Today, we're going to talk about experiences, about coding, about expectations, about community, all those good things. Just a little bit about me, and then we're going to dive into the various different things. We're going to talk about ways in which we don't necessarily get the participation that we want to see in our communities. We can talk about what theoretical approaches there are to dealing with that. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about what we can actually do in a really hands-on way to get participation more consistent or more performant throughout our communities. So right here, right now, I am a community strategist and a community manager for a wonderful company called Netlify, rocking my Netlify tee, where I run a support community for Netlify, which is a hosting and deployment platform. It's really rad. You should check it out sometime. Before I started working at Netlify, I was actually working for a company called Epicodus, which is a code school based in Portland, Oregon, where I live. And we also have a campus in Seattle, Washington. Thank you. And as such, I had the joy and sometimes difficulty, but mostly joy, of teaching a lot of different people how to code. And I'll talk about that in great detail a little bit further along. Before I did either of those two things, I was actually a longtime student of anthropology. And so this talk draws really pretty heavily from my experiences running an online community, so online community building, offline community building in the form of teaching, and also my training as a social scientist and anthropologist. So you get kind of like a three-fer. Is that a thing? I don't know, whatever. It is now. People are really multifaceted. We'll learn a lot more about that in just a sec. So yeah, I taught students from all walks of life, over 300 of them actually, which means 300 different, and this is just for the code school experience, means 300 different kinds of motivators and demotivators, which we know are really, really important. 300 different kinds of backgrounds, religion, ethnicity, lifestyle, place of origin, ways of learning, all kinds of different things that bring people that are different amongst different population groups. And also 300 different ways to be really, really stressed out. That also happens as well. 300 different ways to self-sabotage, too. So because people are really, really multifaceted, right? I've just sort of summarized very quickly a variety of different ways people can be different, and there are many, 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 many more. It's actually really difficult to build a coherent thing that appeals equally to everybody. And because that's the case, just building the framework, just building the forum, just setting up the event, just announcing the conference, just setting up the meetup, just building the infrastructure, right? It's where we start, but it's really not all that we have to do. Because just building the damn thing is not enough to get people to actually show up, and it's definitely not enough to get people to show up consistently. And being that we're all tasked with creating, not just do we want to create experiences, but we also have to justify those experiences. We want to look at data and metrics and KPIs. Consistency is really important to us. You already know this. So all of the communities that we build, or the communities that I've been involved in, which are many offline communities in an unofficial way, and then some officially, in my book, I've learned that they all seem to suffer from three distinct kinds of barriers to consistent participation. And before we kind of can address like theoretical approaches to dealing with the lack of participation, let's kind of like summarize what these sort of participation dysfunctions are, for just very briefly. So I think that low willingness to participate in a conversation, to show up for a meetup, to go to an event, to post in a forum, and by low willingness, I don't mean overall, I mean kind of RSVPing to a meetup but not going. Signing up for code school but not even really going to the first day, or maybe like not even really going to like the first session, something like that. Or saying that you're going to go do something, but you don't actually do it. Like signing up to be an OSS contributor, but not actually submitting a pull request ever. So you're just kind of like not getting off the block here. And then we also have patchy participation, right? Like someone shows up to an event, and then they don't show up for another 6 months, and then they come back again, or they submit a PR, and then they don't do it again. Patchy participation, just overall, it's difficult to work with for us, especially, Because when it comes down to like actually measuring our data and presenting that data to the people who make financial decisions, not knowing how to be able to do a head count or not knowing how to be able to measure participation and engagement can be really tricky if we have folks and we're not quite sure how to count them. Like, they were here last month, but they didn't come for 2 months. What does that even mean? So it can be really difficult. And then, as we all know, it's sometimes really easy to get started with something, but then participation can really wane over time. So we might see folks that post in a forum a bunch, and then they don't really post for a while, and it slows down, or something along those lines, where we see participation waning over time, both in online and offline communities as well. The unfortunate problem with all of these different kinds of ways in which participation really kind of fails to be at a high level and consistent throughout is that our elaborate reward systems, especially when it comes to sort of material objects, don't necessarily always really work, right? We've all had the experience that someone wants to give us yet another t-shirt, and we're like, oof, I have a whole cabinet, I have a whole dresser at my house like full of tech t-shirts from conferences that I go to. I don't really feel reached by this. Material objects don't always create the kinds of engagement and the kinds of desire to participate that we're maybe expecting that they would. So what do we do to improve participation, right? That's the reason you're at this talk. That's what I think about. That's what we're all here to think about and learn about. Let's dive into some theory around like what creates a drive to actually participate before we get into some more hands-on approaches, how we can kind of use that theory to amplify participation in our communities. So we've probably all heard of the term social capital. Is that true? Has you heard of it? Okay. So a lot of people use the term social capital, and really what it is swag. Okay? So it's not always used 100% correctly, but basically what it means is someone gives me an object of some kind that has a certain status attached to it, and when I receive that object, I feel good about myself. Like, I'm wearing my Netlify t-shirt right now. Like, this is great. So this social theory, and here I'm drawing on my background as an anthropologist, was defined by a French social theorist called Pierre Bourdieu in his seminal work, Outline of a Theory of Practice from 1972. So, which is where he defined social capital, cultural capital, which we'll talk about in just a sec, and economic capital, which we won't talk about today because it's not so relevant in this context. It's concerned with the relationship of an individual to the means of production. So if I give somebody a factory, or I give somebody a bunch of money, then we're talking about economic capital, and it's not really super applicable here. Let's talk about social capital in detail for a second. So because we all deal, if we have communities where we give material objects, then we're all interacting with this regularly. The power of swag is not that the t-shirt that I am receiving or the pen or the mug is so amazing, right? It's not that it's just like the highest quality cotton, you know, it's like that's not really the power of the swag. The power of the swag comes from this triangular relationship that exists between myself as the recipient of that swag and how I stand in relationship to the person who gives it to me, and what the relationship between the person that gives it to me and the wider group. And what I mean by that, for example, is I work at Netlify. My assumption that I'm going to get a t-shirt is like, that's a given, right? But if I am actually further away from the company that issues me the t-shirt, I would probably be actually really, really excited about that. Like, I have a strong sense of status of receiving this item. Netlify is a pretty cool company. We do a lot of cool stuff. We have people who really love what we do. But how we stand in relationship to other companies who also do similar things that we do also determines the value of the swag I receive. So this triangular relationship is something that kind of fluxes and changes over time. And it's also the reason why material rewards don't necessarily always work in a consistent and predictable way. Because of the fact that whether you like it or not, we live in a capitalist society, object relationships and the value of objects change all the time. That stuff fluctuates all the time. Companies are hip one moment and then not so much, and then maybe if they're Microsoft, they come back. Like, it's just, it changes and it flexes and it moves, right? And so therefore, these sort of material artifacts that I get kind of change in terms of value and the status that they can bestow on me as a recipient. And also my place in all of this can change over time too. If what I really need, if I'm really hungry and someone gives me a t-shirt, but there's actually somebody else who gives me a cheese sandwich, then the social capital of the cheese sandwich giver is way, way higher, right? So that's who I am fluxes and changes, and so these material wars don't necessarily always apply. Everybody feeling good about social capital and why that's important for us to understand? Okay, great. So the next form of capital, and it's not, again, kind of capital as in money, but it's really what you think of, if this feels like difficult to access mentally, think about status. Think about this as a shorthand for status in your life. Cultural capital is not object bound. It's actually bound to other things that we might receive. Specifically, institutionalized cultural capital. The perfect example of institutionalized cultural capital is if I work in a job, and I'm really lucky that I actually use, clearly, obviously, I use my college degree for my work. But if, for example, I had studied, like, I don't know, 18th century French literature, but I got that degree from a really well-known college, the fact that this institution bestowed a degree upon me is actually sufficient to lend me status in society, regardless of whether or not I actually use that degree. So cultural capital is anything that elevates an individual that's non-material, that they gain through context and contagion with institutions that issue said thing. Kind of following me? Again, it's a triangular relationship. The relationship that I have to this thing that I gain, a degree, but also a certification, something like that, or something even vaguer, even weirder, like the fact that I have an accent that sort of carries with it the whiff of a little bit of status and makes me seem like probably more intelligent than I actually am. That's cultural capital at work. The way someone speaks, the access to the kinds of style, knowledge they have, I know how to dress myself, things like that are all part of a framework of thinking about cultural capital and how we gain status in society. Manners, for example, also cultural capital. They're not issued by an institutional body, but they do contribute to this. So it's this kind of relationship that exists that bestows status on an individual. And this is the kind of thing that we can totally harness for increasing participation and making participation more consistent in the communities that we built. Before we get into that sort of approach, very practically how we can do this, it's important to kind of like consider that anybody, and I'm drawing, and you can tell, I'm drawing really heavily on my experiences as of managing both a support community and also teaching a code school. And some of this is going to be differently applicable to your various different scenarios, but I still think that there's a lot in here that it stays the same. And one thing that stays the same is that generally speaking, when people are participating in community activities, it's a huge motivator for us to want to be able to grow, to want to be able to learn, and to be seen as knowledgeable, regardless of which communities that we engage ourselves in. Whether that's a technical one, whether that's like a football club or something like that, or whether it's a group of people who get together to do, I don't know, flower arranging. We all want to be seen as knowledgeable, all have the opportunity to kind of grow and learn in those spaces and in those communities. So if we're thinking about utilizing cultural capital, opportunities to gain cultural capital in our communities, we first have to make the space safe for people to be able to do that and make mistakes and grow and learn. Really, this is kind of the summary of what I'm trying to communicate, is that I think that it is, I'm not saying we should ditch swag. I'm not saying we should do that. There's a role for that, and I'll show you some concrete ways how we can integrate that in what we do. But what I am really encouraging people to consider is that you should be spending at least as much time and energy and effort and probably money in building things that create experiences for people, not just material rewards. I think that any community program that just relies on doling out material rewards is ultimately going to suffer from the same kinds of inconsistencies that I've outlined earlier and ultimately not going to be that successful. So let's focus on building experiences as well as giving material rewards. One example where I did this is an example where I'm drawing from my code school days, where frequently I had students who would show up, and we had these projects that they needed to complete so we could grade them and give them evaluations and things like that. And the projects that they had to build weren't always that super exciting for them. And so they would just kind of like throw together like the Scrabble score calculator thing that I made, asked them, and they were like, here you go, like there it is, grade it, whatever. And that felt pretty frustrating for me, but it was also like not a good experience for them. And so what I actually did is I talked to them about how it's important to kind of flip it around. And I'm like, I'm sorry, this is not, you're not building this app for me, you're building it for you, because you're the one who needs to learn how to do this thing. So framing these experiences as beneficial to your constituents in your community's lives is really important, because that allows them to gain real value. If I can understand how writing a blog post about a product is actually maybe good for my career because it's teaching me writing skills, someone has framed that for me as an experience, or I can understand how submitting a pull request or doing something else is actually a way that I can benefit my career, that's an amazing experience. And all it takes is a little bit of a reframing job there. You don't even have to really invest a whole lot of money in that experience for people to understand its value for their own lives. I'm talking about let's create ways, not just certification, although I'm really excited to see the previous presentation about certification, and it maps exactly onto what I'm saying when Drew was talking about how it was like surprising that people were like putting their certifications in their email signatures. It's not surprising to me at all, because I completely understand that that's an opportunity to gain cultural capital. So let's provide experiences for people that create a narrative for themselves where they can utilize that for job skills, life skills, people skills. Very quickly. How do we combine opportunities to gain social and cultural capital to encourage participation? That's what you want to know, right? So we outlined, or I outlined, you can disagree with me if you feel like it. Also, you can tweet me if you have something that you want to tweet me about, that's cool. I should mention that. So one problem that I outlined is that we might see a low willingness to participate. So somebody signs up for an event, but they don't actually go. Somebody signs up for class, but they don't actually show up. Well, let's front load a big gift and then follow up with opportunities to kind of wrap them up in a bit of an experience. If someone says, oh, wow, if I commit to submitting like 2 PRs for this open source project, then then they'll give me an iPad. Great. We can't keep doling out iPads, it's financially prohibitive. But what we can do is maybe justify giving an iPad at the beginning and then creating streaks and other things in order to kind of like engage that person and wrap them up in a bit more of an experience-based thing to kind of like get them off the pot. With patchy participation, where people are like, they're still there, right? They're still participating and it's important and relevant enough for them that they still sometimes keep showing up, but it's not important enough to overcome barriers that they might be facing to participating, we can create a really structured environment. This is where things like streaks are really, really helpful, right? Because if you say, okay, you log in every single day or you post one thing every single day for a specific period of time, then you know exactly what's going to happen. This is the reward schedule that you get. This can be really helpful for people who maybe just need a little bit of structure. And we can combine material rewards on a schedule along with like an experience building thing in order to kind of get them to really like engage and commit to participating. Finally, with waning participation, what we might do here is create something kind of a little bit more chaotic, where we just like randomly intersperse material gifts, but also an experience to not just a $20 gift card to Target, but also maybe what you get to do is you get to rack up points and then you get to go to a dinner with a famous software developer, or you get to take a class, or you get to take an online class, or you get to have an experience that meets you where you're at in terms of your own development, and you can utilize that to kind of engage people, because this is a bit too predictable after a while. People are like, yeah, meh. So what we need to do is keep making it more interesting for people to participate. So these are sort of 3 ways that we can kind of go about introducing both social and cultural capital in our rewards programs and things that we do. Obviously, depending on what your community is and what it does, you'll have different issues that you face in different places. Like some communities might be really struggling with people to get up and running. Some communities might be really struggling with waning participation. So how you engage with this stuff can really depend on what the problems are that you're facing. You obviously need to do the work to figure out what are the patterns here that I'm seeing. This is pretty much it. It's really just a starting point to start thinking about these things. I hope that you enjoyed it. My summary basically here really is, we can't pretend that everyone is the same, because they're not. People are very multifaceted. Let's understand how people are participating in the communities that they're building and the barriers that they're facing. Let's give them opportunities to gain different kinds of status from different things, not just material rewards. and we want to make sure that we're building experiences that really enhance people's lives. Thank you.